Welcome back, everybody, to the Comic Art Live online show for the fall 2023. John Suntress here from the Word Balloon Podcast, and always happy to have a new conversation with a guy that I've admired for a long time, and I'm thrilled that I got to know him over the last 3 years. The great Howard Chaykin. Good to see you, Howard.
Calm down, John. Jeez. As I said to someone recently, my arrogance is enormous, but my humility remains profound. But thanks so much. Good seeing you, man. Always a pleasure.
Likewise, man. Congratulations. Have you wrapped up the Kickstarter for your adaptation of the Men's Adventure series? Or
I hate to sound like this, but beats the fuck out of me. I regard myself in this context as labor. I stay away. Let them be management. I let the admin take care of that. I just sit there and smile and say yes.
Well, yes. new Chaykin graphic novel on the way, based on a Men's Adventure Western character at an interesting time. Tell the people if they don't know about this cool book.
It's called Fargo, Hell on Wheels. It's based on the 15th in a series of 20 novels by a guy named John Benteen, who had the really clever idea of identifying the character that Lee Marvin played in The Professionals and Richard Brooks's great picture, and gave the guy a backstory and a front story and built a new character out of this. And Fargo was a soldier of fortune in the early 15 years of the 20th century. Imagine if Conan or Jack Reacher were running with the Wild Bunch. That's who Neil Fargo is. And it's very much in the vein of classic men's adventure pulps. They were written in the 60s or the early 80s, but they feel like they were written in the golden days of paperback originals. They fit in there with the Don Pendleton stuff, with the James Bond stuff, with the Richard Stark Parker novels, the one we chose is called Hell on Wheels, as I say, and it involves a war between a small railroad and a big one. And I tell you, the idea of doing early 20th century technology, I love this. It lends itself so dramatically and so profoundly to a great graphic experience, because that machines, they're not Art Deco, but they are just industrial in so profound a way that they really lend themselves to visuals. I'm really excited about this. So we made our goal and then some. Scripts written. We're in the process of finishing thumbnails now. First 5 pages are done. We've got a shitload of stuff coming, and I couldn't be happier or more surprised. Thank you.
What kind of surprise? What was that?
Well, I frankly I have no faith in myself. I'm an off-putting figure at best. I'm not the most beloved guy in the business. And as I've always said, as long as John Byrne's alive, I won't be the most despised man in comics. So stay breathing, John. But we're despised for different reasons. So I'm very grateful. I'm pretty good.
That's excellent. Everyone's saying hello in the chat. Listen, I was just saying this off the air. Howard and I talk all the time, which is great. And we can fill 50 minutes by just dropping a hat. I'm not worried. But this is your chance to ask Howard some great questions, not only about the new stuff and about the seminar that's coming up. And we will talk about that in just a second. But really, Howard will talk greatest hits. He's cool with that.
I'm good. My feeling is I'm a man who likes talking to a man who likes to talk. I tend to be, there are people who have Tourette's. I have Florette's because I'm just that guy,
I have Clorette's because I usually have bad breath. So
I got nothing to lose.
Clorette.
Right. Ooh, a good callback. Nicely made. Very good.
Hey, man, what are you talking about with your Casper Gutman line? I love it, man. Still haven't watched the Ricardo Cortez Satan Made a Lady or
I have never. No, Satan Made a Lady is Warren Williams and Betty Davis. The Cortez film is called the Maltese Falcon.
Also I've never Maltese Falcon. Yeah,
I've never seen it, and I love the fact that Ricardo Cortez, speaking from an ethnic perspective, despite the fact that he had this Latin lover name, was a nice Jewish boy. It was very good.
Sure,
it made my heart tingle to know that Ricardo. I forget his real name, but it was not Ricardo Cortez. No.
That's awesome. Steve Scott watching from Belgium. How you doing? And
who was that?
Steve Scott, one of our viewers right now, is saying hello from Belgium.
Hey, man.
There you go.
It's Steve Scott. Oh, my God. Hi, Steve. Where are you in Belgium?
Yeah, let's find out. While we're doing that, a week this coming Saturday.
Saturday all day. Yeah.
All day Saturday. Absolutely. Howard and Mark Waid are going to be doing this incredible seminar called Comic Book University. And why don't you tell people about what you guys are going to do, Howard, for 7 hours? My God.
Yeah, it's going to be, look, I mean, Mark and I are simpatico in so many ways. There are very few writers in comics. I've always identified Guggenheim and Waid, both, the two Marks, as two guys in comics who really understand the real estate of the page, how limited the scale of the page is. They have a sense of the relationship of space to time. So during the, back in the early aughts, I did a 3-day-long seminar at Marvel, where I was hired by Marvel to beat the living crap out of 5 guys they had under contract, but they felt weren't working up to speed. And the second day was this experience. It was basically the breakdown and structure of the visual of narrative, the graphic design and the service of narrative. Mark will be talking at great length about writing scripts. I will be talking about how to take that script and transliterate it from a narrative and literary version into a visual narrative, because the writing in comics is as much the responsibility of the artist as it is of the writer, and that the artist's responsibility is to concoct and to contrive visual images that are endowed with narrative value, that have characters who are acting in relationship to each other, who are interacting with the reader in a very specific and yet subjective way, and fill the landscape of each panel and page in a particular way that gives each panel a reason for being that is simply more than decorative. And the rest of the discussion will talk about size, space, the relationship of space to time. And I guarantee you will walk out of this seminar with a renewed idea of what comics are, and perhaps be daunted by the fact that there is a language, because there is a mindset extant in the country that seems to regard comics as a sort of a place for amateurism to function, and it mistakes bad drawing for cartooning. And it's time for people to understand that comics has a syntax and a vocabulary, visually and narratively, that is deserving of respect and deserving of attention. And it applies to everything from silent comics to the bombastic, Super Thunder Dragon, space monster, mutant laser, nonsense. So yeah, I guarantee an intriguing time.
Well, I had the opportunity of being backstage for a truncated version of what you guys are doing a couple summers ago. And I can speak from that experience that, again, you guys have your act down, so much so that not only is it happening at UCLA next Saturday, but also coming up in January, you're going to be doing this at Albuquerque Comic-Con the weekend of the 19th through the 21st. So if that's closer to where you are, you might want to. Tickets are available for that. Tickets are still available for the 18th at UCLA as well.
At Ackerman Hall, at UCLA, we start early in the morning. We end late in the afternoon. It'll be Mark, then the two of us, then me, then the two of us again. There'll be a lot of interaction. I believe in engagement, as does Mark. And if you're really lucky, maybe Mark will start a fight with somebody. I never do. I end fights. I just sort of like, okay, whatever.
When you were coming up, Howard, because I know that DC and Marvel would do chalk talks with artists. Did you experience any of those yourself?
None of that. No.
Really?
No. I learned everything I my entire learning curve was working as an assistant and an apprentice and a gopher. I learned more watching Gil Kane work for a year than I did from any other education I've ever had in my life. There were things I learned to do, and there were things I learned not to do. And in those days, I got heavy criticism from guys like Dick Giordano, Joe Orlando, certainly Gil Kane, who was profoundly critical. Gil was as self-critical as he was critical of anyone else, and Wallace Wood, and Neil Adams. And Gray Morrow. Gray Morrow was the gentlest of them all. He did. I think he just didn't give a shit either way. But the experience of being dismantled by Joe Orlando or by Dick Giordano in terms of editorial delivery of material was really, really valuable, because my first couple of years was really flying blind, having no idea what I was doing, and any flash or smarty pants stuff was an attempt to conceal my own ineptitude and my own ignorance. And it wasn't until I left comics and began to work as an illustrator, which market I felt I was inept for. I was not really qualified to continue in that regard. And I came back to comic books with a renewed understanding of the fact that comics deserved more work than I'd been giving it. And in the long run, that time away gave me an understanding of technique and the application of technique. And to this day, I mean, I've never been much of a student. I was a terrible student in school. I breezed through until I stopped. And then I just sort of, I barely got out of high school because I didn't give a shit about anything. But today, to this day, I mean, I continue to look at stuff and figure out ways to apply it. And a lot of it has to do with looking outside of mainstream comic books to find means to convey narrative ideas that are not necessarily based on panel to panel progression, that are a way of delivering information. I mean, people laugh when I say this, but it's really true. IKEA's instructions, those pictographs, are a fascinating source and exercise to use in this context. Speaking of IKEA, the first time I ever saw computer-generated imagery was when I had a kitchen built for me by IKEA. It was many, many years ago, in those earliest days of CGI. And I'm looking at this thing, holy shit, this is something we can use. There's something here, you know what I'm saying? So all that comes in. I mean, I think about Reed Crandall, as an example. Crandall was a guy who came out of the Quality Comics studio. He worked under Eisner. It was his visual of Black Hawk. And Crandall's covers on Black Hawk and Military, and then later on Police and Modern, are, for my money, certainly my favorite. They may be the best covers done in the 1940s and early 50s. And it isn't until Kurtzman comes along that he completely reinvents the way the cover should look as these sort of agitprop posters. And then Dave Johnson comes along and makes everybody else look like shit, motherfucker. Anyway, Crandall was always a guy who had a very deliberate and linear style. And the work I knew of Crandall was the Black Hawk stuff and the early stuff for EC, with that very linear, deliberate ink line that echoed Joseph Clement Cole and people like that. And then all of a sudden, when they finally published the Pictofiction stuff, and the Love Confessions books were there, and you got to see Reed Crandall doing comic book pages that were so deeply and completely influenced by the work of guys like Al Parker, like Kobe Whitmore, with Joe Bowler, Joe D'Andrea, Bernie Demers. It was just staggering to see that this guy was able to put aside decades of a career experience and move on to something else. There's my beautiful wife walking through the room.
Hey, nice to see you. Continue, please.
So, being available to every possible influence is really important to me. And one of the things that I've come to understand is that Flag, although it was never a commercial success, was enormously influential on the talent pool that came into the business in the 90s. What I find stunning about that is that talent pool was not a particularly literate talent pool, but neither visually nor textually. They weren't readers. So I'm seeing techniques that I introduced in Flag being used in such schmucky ways, in such utterly pointless fashion, in the service of Flash with no light. And it's staggering to me. When I really, I could go off on a tangent, but I won't. I will wind myself back from that tangent to come back to being a nice person again.
Well, Troy Pierce has an interesting comment about Reed Crandall that I didn't know. He said it was hard to believe that he ended up in Wichita with his mom and was a janitor at the end. Wow.
Al Williamson found him working as a security guard and janitor and brought him out and basically, clean them up, straighten them out, dried them out, and then put them to work for Archie at Creepy and Eerie.
Wow.
Yeah, that's how that worked out.
Well, I'm glad that they found him and you were able to give him a second.
Well, working for Catholic Comics was obviously not the best thing for Reed. Just kidding.
Troy also wanted to know earlier, did Gil influence your music listening?
Yes, unequivocally. Some of my fondest and funniest moments were getting caught in arguments between Gil Kane and Julie Schwartz. Julie and Gil were both fanatical jazz fans. Seriously. I mean, they were like shut the fuck up already with you, that kind of stuff. And Julie didn't acknowledge the saxophone as a jazz instrument. No bullshit.
What the hell?
Unless it was played by Bud Freeman, okay, who was one of the Chicago guys, one of the Austin High gang, who were a bunch of Chicago kids who all wanted to grow up to be Louis Armstrong.
Gotcha. Okay.
And whereas Gil was, and so from Gil's perspective, Julie was, quote, a moldy fig, which was what progressives called jazz fans of the traditional stuff. Because remember, this fandom was existing while it was happening. I'm talking now from an historical perspective, so I can listen to the Austin High Gang the same day I'm listening to serious hard bop from Art Blakey, and it's all of the same. It exists in the same function, but in those days, entirely different. The only thing they agreed on was Lee Wiley, who was a girl singer of the 1930s, not well known as well as her sisters, but the equivalent of what Spencer Tracy said about Katharine Hepburn. There isn't a lot there, but what's there is terse. and Lee Wiley had a very thin voice, a small voice, but she was just fucking great.
Wow.
A career that lasted from the early 1930s to the late 1950s. And her version of Manhattan, we'll have Manhattan, the Bronx and Staten Island too. That version and the version by Dinah Washington are, for me, the two great pivots of that great song.
I'm a big Dinah Washington fan. Yeah, I can appreciate that.
Gil and I'm proud of the fact that I finally convinced Gil of the genuine value and the transcendent value of Duke Ellington's orchestra over Stan Kenton's.
Very cool. Wow. Reed.
On the other hand, he could not countenance anything even vaguely smacking of hillbilly swing. Texas swing was like, what the fuck is this shit? And I love hot Western music. So
Bob
Wills and
the Playboy Band, right?
Milton Brown and his beautiful brownies. Adolf Hoffner and his men. My sweet senorita, my own sweet Chiquita. Let's dance once again, the Spanish fandango. There you go. Where else do you get that?
Old Dirty Fatty, great name. Says you have a wealth of comics history knowledge.
Say again?
You say you're.
There's someone there. We got to work on your self-esteem there, pal. Go ahead.
He says you have a wealth of comics history knowledge. Do you have any good Tex Blaisdell stories?
I do. And luckily everybody's dead, so I can tell the story. Okay. Shh, it's just between us. Okay. All right. So Tex and Carmine are at a party, comics party. Okay. And Carmine, and there's this woman dancing. It's Frug time. It's that era. Everybody's doing the Frug, And Carmine starts going off lubriciously about this one woman he's seeing dancing across the floor, and he's going on and on. And Tex is letting him go on and on, having the best time. And finally, after Carmine runs out of his limited vocabulary to describe how hot he thinks this woman is, Tex says, "Oh, by the way, that's my daughter."
Oh God. My only Kurt Swan page that I own is inked by Tex Blaisdell, and it's a Lois and Clark scene at the U.S. Capitol, and they are raving about the white navy bean soup that is served at the Capitol, and it's kind of like a hallmark if you eat in the cafeteria.
Was it Carrie Bates?
I don't remember who wrote it because it was only through. I should really look it up because I bought it from eBay.
Carrie or Elliot.
Sure, it's that era. It's certainly that era. Right. Might have been Marty. But Pasco. But yeah. That's That's great. All right, Sam.
Also, I mean, let's not forget that Tex did the splash panels of every Sunday of Mary Perkins on Stage.
Honestly, Howard, it is such an education finding out the various people that did go back and forth from comics and strips. I had no idea that Blaisdell did that. I didn't know. Go ahead.
Mary Perkins on Stage, when it became a hit, in its Sunday page, they like all Sundays in those days, they published in 2 different formats. They did it in halves and in tabs, and they had to design the splash panel with a logo in it to serve either as a half wide or a 3/4 wide. And Tex would do these establishing shots, Central Park, Manhattan, and you can't find a more perfect school of lessons on how to draw New York from the 1950s to the 1980s than what Tex did in those backgrounds. They're just beautiful. He did these great establishing shots. I mean, they were just breathtaking.
Wow. That's like, again, growing up in the 70s, I was reading The Invaders, and now I'm blanking. Shame on me. The artist who did Johnny Hazard.
Frank Robbins.
Frank Robbins. Yeah, I knew Frank Robbins' scripts from his Batman and Batman family work, and there was something about The Invaders. It was, to me, ugly, but I'm like, something keeps me coming back all the time. And then years later, I finally saw his Johnny Hazard, and oh my God, I mean, it's very, very Kniff, very Steve Canyon-like in its presentation to me.
The thing he did better than Kniff, though, I think, and this is my opinion, is that his ordnance was extraordinary. His weapons, his automobiles, his vehicles, his airplanes. He really had a great handle on technology. And this, this must have had something. He made a great deal of money outside and separate from his career. He built a component. He invented a component for long playing record turntables.
Wow.
That was what he retired on to Mexico on.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay.
I had no idea. That's amazing. Wow.
Talk to old people, you get all this shit, And who knows if I'm telling you the truth?
And that man you're the Paul Harvey of comics.
Paul Harvey? Wow.
Well, broadcast.
Harvey.
Come on.
Paul Harvey.
That's my world. That's I know the.
The first time I heard Paul Harvey for the first time, the first night I was living in Chicago it was September of 1968. I said, "Who the fuck is this guy?" Wow.
That man was. It's
in those days, Chicago was such a great radio city back in the 60s. Holy shit. WCFL, WLS. Man, it was dynamite. I loved it. It was just a great radio town.
I hear you, man. Yeah. I got the hangover 70s from that when I was a little kid, and I adored all those guys and got to know a lot of them, just like you.
Well, I was in Chicago studying to be a radio broadcaster until I realized that I never wanted to see any of these people again. And I hated them so much.
Or you find out that the booth announcers that are just doing the top of the hour for the TV stations are sitting with a fifth of Jack or something to get through the next day. Yeah,
a mess. Well, actually, Mike Gold and I are both huge fans of booth announcers. We still talk occasionally about Ken Nardine. So that's the deal. But I grew up in New York, so I was listening to WBAI all the time before BAI became an idiot station. The all-night guys on BAI were Steve Post, Larry Josephson, and Bob Fass, and that's where we got to hear, oh Jesus, oh fuck, what's his name?
Gene Shepard?
No, well, I listened to Shep every night. I mean, that was a given. But oh God, he died a couple of years ago. He was he did Frank Jokeland and Sarah Guy. He was another one of the guys who was on The Great American Dream. Marshall Efron.
Okay.
Who Efron was a regular on Bob Fass's show, and I was a stoner, and this was just like absolutely the peak, the apex. I listened to Shep every night. I never had the nerve to go down to the Limelight because I looked like such a geek. But yeah, Shep was a big part of my childhood, and that in my teen years. We'd call into Fass, he'd hang up on us, and Josephson was phenomenal, and Steve Post as well. It was like radio in New York in the 60s, Chicago radio in the 60s and 70s had such an affinity for an acknowledgement of the existence of the audience. And there was a guy who came to New York from Chicago who called himself Joe from Chicago. who came over and became the chief DJ at WNEW-FM in New York, was a Metro Media station. And he brought a bunch of guys. They were brought in by a guy named Vince Scelsa, who'd been a college DJ and then became a Scelsa had a great ear. And Pete Fornatal was the nice guy, and Scott Muni was the old guy. But Meg Griffin was Joe from Chicago's girlfriend. Joe played one day. This is at Upstart. This is in the late 70s. I'm sitting there with Walter. Walter's on one side of the room, I'm on the other. I think Sherman might have been there. I don't know who else was there. And he plays "Stairway to Heaven" by Led Zeppelin, and then he plays the Gilligan's Island theme to the tune of "Stairway to Heaven." And then he goes quiet, and he comes back on the air and says, the station has now received dozens of calls complaining about this, and I want to apologize. He then proceeded to spend the next 4 hours of his show playing the "Stairway to Heaven" as Gilligan's Island for the rest of the show. Fuck you. I love this man so much. It made my day. I turned the radio off because I hate that shit anyway. And I went back to listen to records. In those days, they were actual LP records,
I do know. Yeah. That's awesome. Jewish Dragons and Lee Parmenter, I want everyone to know that, first of all, Jewish Dragons says, okay, your singing convinced me. I just bought my ticket. See you next Saturday. And then,
fucking A, baby.
How about that? Right. And you continue to sell tickets because Lee Parmenter says, I'll be at Howard's Comic Use Saturday. I was wondering, he wants to know if you want to use an older page you did from Weird War Tales for an example during your talk, because I guess he has
what not to do. I say, Lee, by the way, I'm coming over to your house and we're going to there'll be a reckoning in this. I've had it with you, Lee. I'm up to here. I'm just up to here with you. This is all Mom's greatest hits. Okay. No, I will not be using such a page. No, because basically anything I did at that point in my career was an absolute waste of time. It should be used to wrap packages. But thanks for asking.
That's excellent.
Look forward to seeing you, and you too, Dragon.
And again, I love these references.
I love Jewish Dragon. That's my favorite because I'm the Semite sorcerer. I'm the Jew from the future, is what I am. That's me.
Hey, that's like Jackie Gleason and Pray Tell, the Honeymooners episode. You're the Jew.
Sure, it can do all of it. It can do all of it.
Steve Scott, who earlier, I guess, told us that he's in Antwerp drawing comics.
Why are you in Antwerp? Why would anybody? Actually, Antwerp, you could do worse.
Yeah.
One of the things I love most about Belgium is how much they hate the French for taking the name of French fries as their own. The Belgians insist they invented pommes frites, and yet we call them French fries. And there's an enormous Belgian resentment of this. Oh. And I encourage resentment of all sorts because then I sit back and watch. I'm a great believer in Eric Fromm's "Let's you and him fight." Yeah, go ahead, go.
But man, you go to Belgium, you go to Amsterdam or whatever, and you have pommes frites, and it's like, man, we've been doing French fries wrong for decades.
Also, serving with that garlic infused mayonnaise. Ooh, a little aioli in the night, baby.
I'm absolutely with you. Let's see here. Fat, what was it here? Old Dirty Fatty said he sat in on an example of Nuff Said, the old comic book show on WBAI back.
Right. Oh my God, I forgot all about that. Back in the day, before WBAI got taken over by a terribly earnest and self-regarding bunch of lunatics, it was an absolutely anarchic radio station that was just so swell. How old and dirty are you, Fatty?
It's pretty cool, man.
I'm old and fat, but I had a shower, so I'm pretty clean.
Sam Maroney asked earlier, and I'm really glad you brought it up again.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Sam's here.
We keep getting good comments on the chats, and then they get buried.
Maroney's great. I love Sam.
He wanted to know about how everyone seemed to get a crush on Dorothy Woolfolk. Is that true? The old romance editor.
Dottie was just the best. She was. I will when I see Sam, I will use the phrase that I would not use here to describe her relationship to most people. Sam, remind me when I see you to tell you what Dottie Wolf. I will. Sam, listen up. You and me, face to face, one on one. Nobody should hear this. But she was the greatest. She was a Yiddish mama, and as significantly as Dorothy was, Dottie's assistant editor was a guy named Ethan Morden.
Oh, okay.
And Ethan was, as I recall, a log cabin Republican, a Mattakini Society cat. Okay. And in those days, of course, you know, Ethan's probably maybe 3 to 5 years older than me. I don't know.
Okay.
And he was very buttoned down. I mean, none of us were wearing neckties. We looked like cowboys, you know. And he was very uptight and very quiet. And he was just like, he looked like he would have been played by Anthony Perkins if Perkins were more Jewish looking.
Okay.
And I bought Morden's first novel, which is called How Long Has This Been Going On? Because it had a great Gary Kelly cover. And he was in the vanguard of gay novelists. But he comes along a couple of years later as, for my money, from my experience, the single greatest living scholar on the American musical theater. Okay.
High praise from you, being the Buffalo
hero.
Go on.
The decade by decade breakdown of his history of this work is amazing. And I'm convinced that it was Dottie, working for Dottie, that gave him the confidence to push forward and move on. Okay. I mean, I think Gray Morrow did the best work he ever did for DC for Dottie. I truly do. I think I'm the only member. I think Alan Weiss is the only other guy of my generation that did any work for her. Okay. The work I did for her was terrible. It was terrible. Ugh. But she was such a lovely woman. And of course, I mean, I've got her avatar in Hate Kids is Lottie Zanuck.
I was going to say, absolutely, yes. That was my assumption, so I'm glad you're confirming that.
Yeah.
That's great. And you just wrapped that up 2 months ago, end of September. Hey, kids.
And I'm right now. I've completed the back matter for the trade paperback. The trade paperback has gone to bed. That'll be out, I believe, the first week of December.
Okay, great.
And there's a new Untold Tale, and there are 2 Noah Gitlin pieces. Because if I can't self-flagellate and beat the shit out of myself in print through an avatar who is obviously me, what's the point of getting up in the morning, right? There you go.
I love the series, man. I really did, and congratulations on it. And I'm glad.
The fact that I know no one's reading it because I haven't got the shit kicked out of me yet.
Well, I mean, are there contemporaries that are in the book that are still around? Because it would seem to me most of the
well, the 3rd volume. Oh, I'm convinced there are people in that. I am sure that friendships have been ended on the basis of the 3rd volume.
I hope not.
I have no doubt in my mind.
Jason,
I will not name names, but there are friendships. I mean, yeah.
Jason Williams has a great question. He loves the art you did for the album cover for the Lee Van Helm, Johnny Cash, James album. Did you do other album covers?
I did a couple of albums for an early house guy named The Hood, which, oddly enough, those covers are in the back matter for Times Square, which will be out in February. Finally, the legal obstacles on Times Square have been surmounted and pushed forward. We are on, and the Hood album covers are very much of a piece with the Times Squared artwork. The music is house music, which has no impact on my life. I'm not that guy, but they were fun to do. And thanks so much for how kind you were about that. I did while I was doing the leap. Should I tell the story of how this happened? I mean,
of course.
Right. It's 1980, and I'm in Southern California. I'm up at the Sheraton Universal or the Hilton, whatever the hotel used to be up at the top of Universal, because the guys who were doing the heavy metal movie are having an absolutely impossible time getting work out of their talent. I came to understand that the people they had hired were marginally competent. Their standards were really low, and they couldn't get anything out of them. So they flew me out. They got me really cheap, fucking cheap. I was out for a week, and I was able to complete what they regarded as an eight-hour mission between 9 and 11. Because I come from New York City and I have a commitment to professionalism. I designed the last 20 minutes of the movie.
Wow.
I did all the fake Mobius stuff. Okay. And I did the girl from the Harry Canyon sequence. And I storyboarded the last 8 minutes of the movie too. This is all way above what I was being paid to do. But I had all these afternoons free. Okay. So a pal of mine was the assistant art director at A&M Records. Long dead now. And I went over there, had lunch. And he said, "You want to do something?" I said, "Yeah, what the hell?" Sure. So I booked this wraparound cover for this an oratorio about Jesse James, which starred Levon Helm, Johnny Cash, Charlie Daniels, and Emmylou Harris.
Wow.
And I did an ad for the Police for Zenyatta Mandata. And I was able to do the black and white stuff for this while I was there because I had the tools. Came home and did the painting. And so, it didn't turn into much, but it was a lot of fun. It was elaborate shit. It was a lot of work. Oh, man. But yeah, I had a good time doing that. So thank you, Heavy Metal, because they paid me nothing. And I made a lot more money working for A&M Records that week while I was doing the work for Heavy Metal. And the movie sucked anyway. So let's call it.
Oh, I love that movie. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but you were 11. I mean, come on. You were
I wasn't 18. I mean, I was 16 or 17.
Oh, it's so good. There's tits in it. No.
I mean, listen, it didn't hurt that there were tits in it, but.
NG. No. I mean, the only thing good about it was that it wasn't by Ralph Bakshi. It wasn't by Ralph. It was terrible.
Was Reitman really involved, given that it was an animated movie?
No, it was basically it was all Michael Gross. Michael Gross was the guy, and John Russo.
Okay.
And Len Mogul, who was Mogul, obviously is old Yiddish for I will interfere to no good use. Just nothing, brought nothing to the table. What as they say in France, quel douchebag.
No,
I'm assuming he's dead, so I can talk nastily about him.
And didn't they? So beyond the animation, didn't you do a couple of the stories that they ended up animating in the movie, or no?
No.
So Lincoln Stern, I always thought Lincoln Stern was like your.
No, that's Wrightson.
Oh, that is Bernie. Shame on me. All right.
What, you want drugs again, John? Stop it. Stop the madness. Like Susan Powder used to say, stop the madness.
Almost Annie Lennox in the infomercials.
Wow. You're on it, baby.
Come on,
got
man.
it going.
Come on,
nice
man.
word.
You're the marathoner, and I'm like,
Annie Lennox is my favorite new thing to say about anybody. I'm almost Annie Lennox. Thank you very much.
I am always a lap behind you in the relay race, but I'm trying hard to keep up with
but you did a callback that I really loved. God love you. Nicely made.
That's a good base hit for me today. I'll take it. That's great.
Hey, what you got?
That's awesome, man. Lee wanted to know if you're bringing any. The trades may not be ready for Volume 3 for Hey Kids.
No.
But bringing any trades of Hey Kids to UCLA next week.
Oh, what am I, a retailer now? Lee, you and I have a reckoning here, man. I will bring it. Yes, I probably not. If I remember, I will bring you a copy of Volume 2. If I remember. See that? Old people remembering two things that don't go together like Reese's peanut butter cups. You know what I'm saying?
I know Christian Gossett's involved too in comic book.
Yeah, Gossett's part of this. Yeah, it's a big lumbering machine. McLaughlin is daddy. And I'm hoping to get into a big fight with Waid at one point or another because I'll wipe the floor with him.
You're scrappy, man. I understand. Waid's got the lose, but you're scrappy.
Nothing to lose.
No, honestly, this is great, and truly, you guys have really reached this wonderful chemistry when you do these presentations.
Well, I mean, I guarantee both a really good time and I say this with no irony and quite seriously, a genuinely transformative experience in the way you look at a comic book page. I promise. Well, because there's so much information encoded in the tropes of what make up a comic book page that people tend to ignore this by thinking that Robert Crumb was being literal when he said it's just lines on paper. And I think people should learn, with any luck, I will be able to convey the idea that the work is worthy of actual effort as opposed to spontaneous combustion, if you will.
I will. That's great. No, again, what I watched you guys do a year or so ago is only a fraction of what you guys will be doing next Saturday. And then again, everybody in Albuquerque at the Albuquerque Comic-Con, January 19th through the 21st.
Which is the best time of the year to be in Albuquerque. Because a month later, you'll go out on the street and burst into flames.
Exactly. No, that's terrific, man. Man, we keep getting calls for stories about some of the old timers.
It's Howard Chaykin talks shit about the dead. That's right.
I might have to rename the hour as Howard Chaykin talks shit about the dead. No, and I'm hoping for a good story or a bad story. But old Dirty Fatty wants to know about the great Irwin Hasen.
I didn't know Irwin very well, and I
No?
pissed Irwin off a lot. No, I didn't. He was Irwin was one of those guys who was a deeply beloved figure. Gil hated everybody. Gil was my liaison to all this shit. And Irwin was one of the two people that Gil loved unequivocally. The other one being Frank Giacoia.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, well, I told you the Frank Giacoia story. Well, okay.
I'll tell that after the Irwin story, but feel free. Go
on. So Gil loved Irwin, and Irwin was Irwin was like the Burgess Meredith of comics. He was a little fella, kind of not unprepossessing, who was very good with women. Very, very good. Women liked Irwin.
He's cute. He was a cute little man.
Yeah. When Irwin got old, he thought they still liked him for the reasons they liked him when he was younger. And they really didn't. They liked him because he was an adorable old man. I mean, I came to understand years ago that my it got up and went. I'm like an unmade bed now. I mean, Palomar sent me a photograph of me and my wife from 22 years ago. And with the two of us looked like Vernon and Irene Castle. We're ready to go out and dance. And I took a look at myself. And my wife still looks pretty fabulous. And I look like an unmade bed, like I said. Frank Giacoia. I've told this story on Facebook. For those of you who missed it, those who want to hear me tell it verbally. Frank Giacoia was one of the most beloved people in comics. Just a lovely man. Fairly lazy. He was one of the guys who broke out of comic books and went to strips, but never really penciled his own work. Everybody else was ghosting his shit. Jack ghosted a lot of his stuff, and in pencil. And so Frank dies suddenly, and it threw Gil for a loop in a really big way. It was the sort of the key turning in the lock of his mortality. He recognized that this meant that he would eventually die. And I'm having lunch with Gil, and lunch with Gil was always an experience because Gil ate like. Gil's idea I think Gil could have easily spent the rest of his life eating in a high school cafeteria. He had no palate whatsoever. It was astonishing to me. His idea of a good lunch was a ham sandwich, no cheese, no mustard, no mayonnaise, white bread with a strawberry milkshake. Holy fuck. Eating like an 11-year-old with his grown man. So he says, he tells me Frank's death really hit him hard, blah, blah, blah. And so he goes off to make an amends tour, to apologize to everyone because he's alienated so many people over his life. He and Severin make up. It's just it's an astonishing experience.
Wow.
So about a month or so later, I have my monthly lunch, and we sit down, we're chatting, blah, 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 blah. I said, so how's the amends tour going? And he goes on rhapsodically. He says, this guy, that guy, this woman. And in the middle of all, he says, except for that fucking Carmine, he can go fuck himself. And that was it for me. It was fabulous, I mean, and understand, I adore Gil Kane. I love the man dearly, but he was as guilty of everything as he was accused of. Trust me. He was, in the words of my esteemed old Jewish grandma, a ganef. A liar, a cheat, and a thief. He was a liar, a cheat, and a thief. But he was incredibly entertaining and incredibly illuminating. As I said, I learned a lot of things that I did and a lot of things not to do. And as I've said more than once as well, I stand on the shoulders of giants. Gil Kane, Wallace Wood, Neil Adams, Gray Morrow, and Joe Orlando. And the great unifying factor of those 5 men is that not one of them could write worth a shit. And I'm a pretty good writer. My work is best served by the relationship of text to picture. And that's what comics is. That's why I'm a comics man in every way, shape, and form.
I respect that. Simon Lemire, what is in the language of sequential art? What have you found that has changed the most from when you began to now?
Well, I think there's the breaking away that my generation engineered of the 6-panel grid, the acceptance of different shapes and a panel shape as a regular function, as a function of the narrative, as opposed to simply of the decorative. And detrimentally, I think this attenuated narrative stuff, the decompression, is just an absolutely dreadful and boring way of telling a story. I was recently asked to do a cover for a new book, a variant cover, and I'm looking at this thing, and it was like 10 pages of story crammed into 25 pages of artwork. It was just, I mean, it was not badly drawn, just wasn't very good comics. There was no momentum, there was no impetus, there was no sense of dramatic rhythm. And everything seemed very languorous and labored in its fear of appearing to be interesting. And I couldn't find a picture worth a shit in these covers. I submitted two, they rejected both. I submitted the third, they gave me notes, and I said, listen, forget about it, I'm done. I don't need this. You know, I really don't need to involve myself in a project for which I have no respect. And that decompression thing, which is a direct result, one of the direct results of the writer becoming the alpha in comics, I think it's had a negative impact on the material. And I think, adding to this as well, is that my generation was probably the last generation that read outside of comics for entertainment. That, you know, for better or worse, Frank's influence from Milton, at least he was reading Spillane. You know, I don't care for Spillane, but at least he was reading that stuff. And the generation that followed ours, Frank follows my generation. He's 5 years younger than me. They don't read for entertainment at all, as far as I can tell. If they read anything, they read children's books. They read, you know, young adult fiction, which is children's books, basically. It's what kids call chapter books. Sure. And their worldviews are, generally speaking, formed by comic books and comic book movies and comic book television shows. And they're easily overawed by dramatic effects that have little or nothing to do with actual narrative context and compulsion. And it's often difficult to, I mean, I just got back in the country for 2 weeks. I've been in Europe for 2 weeks. And before I left, I was working on a Substack post about a revelatory experience I'd had about a month ago, now 6 weeks ago, in regard to my understanding of modern criticism. And I realized that I was repeating a lot of things I've been saying a lot for the past couple of years. And I realized that I needed to define the fact that I was repeating myself, but I did have new information. And the title for the piece came to me while I was sitting in the Gielgud Theatre in London a week ago, on Tuesday, watching the opening number of Stephen Sondheim's Old Friends, when Bernadette Peters sang Comedy Tonight. Something familiar, something peculiar. And that was it. That's my title, which justifies the fact that I'm doing something familiar, that I'm repeating myself, but finding new things to say about what I'm repeating. And to a great extent, I've come to understand that much of the value choices that readers of comic books make are based in no way on actual critical thinking, but are often based on an entirely personalized emotional effect or even affect. That I want to be this character. I want this character to behave in the way I would behave. That there's a profound identification with the content and a misunderstanding and non-recognition of the form.
Interesting.
And I have absolutely no problem reading narrative about people who are utterly repulsive and repugnant. I do not need to have someone to root for. Yep. It is totally unnecessary for me. I no problem with this at all. I'm reading right now. I'm reading Joseph Litvak's Un-Americans, which is an academic treatise re-examining the blacklist from a perspective that I was aware of, but not entirely informed about. And it is a fascinating document. The connecting tissue he makes between Elia Kazan and Bud Schulberg's On the Waterfront and their film 3 years later of A Pace in the Crowd is fascinating. And it's made me rethink my entire feeling about both movies and about both of them as talent.
Wow. That's interesting.
And,
yeah, honestly, because and forgive me, I didn't mean to step on you, but I got to know Bud in his later years through boxing.
Right.
Yeah. So that's ironic. Now, once again, Howard, this is what happens. We get together and you give me something else that I got to put on my reading list. That sounds amazing.
Well,
I really want to say
it. Made me want to find a story in this world to do something about it with. It really did.
Wow. Maybe a future project.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's great, man. That's
potentially a Hey Kids comics that takes place during the blacklist.
Sure.
Something about a guy who loses everything, who finds himself in the comic book business. I don't know. So I'm not reading Harry Potter. I didn't have to read. There was nothing in my reading list that made it necessary for me to justify reading Harry Potter, despite my rejection of J.K. Rowling, who I don't particularly reject. I really don't care one way or the other. I think the word genocide is thrown around a little bit too readily and radically. I just unsubscribed from a literary newsletter for referring to what's going on in Gaza as genocide. They don't call it Jewhead. They call it jihad. Just saying.
I hear
whatever.
You. I understand.
I'm sorry to go politic. You're not. Let's get back to comics. Hey, Super Dragon Laser Mutant. Yeah.
Well, the good news is, again, we've got these two great seminars from Howard coming up next weekend at UCLA's Ackerman Hall on Saturday, November 18th, starting at 10 a.m. It's over 6 hours of presentation and instruction, and then again in January at the Albuquerque Comic-Con from the 19th through the 21st. Tickets are still available for both events. They help the Hero Initiative, which is important to point out as well. Jim McLaughlin, kind of the ring master on these great seminars. And Kazra, I guess we're wrapping up. I'm so sorry, everybody. You got great questions, but we're up against time, and everyone's got to get set up.
I'm either at Ackerman Hall and in Albuquerque in the middle of the night, curled up in a ball in fear. So if you get there early, kick me. Nudge me with your foot. It'll be good for you.
Absolutely, man.
John, thanks for having me. Great talking to you, as ever.
You beat me to it, Howard. Always a pleasure. You know that. As I always say with a lot of my
enough shit about enough shitheads.
God bless you. As I always say, I wish we all lived on the same street, and I'd be kibitzing with you every morning for coffee and stuff, and you'd be like,
"Oh yeah, no, I had my coffee this morning with." You mean they pay you for doing this shit? What are you kidding? How dare? That's it. It's true. John, stay warm. I know it's winter where you are.
Yeah, sadly, it's on its way. We've already had our first frost, so no, you're right about that, Howard. You've been at
Ackerman Hall, November the 18th. We're there at 10. Albuquerque Comic-Con. Be there. You'll have a great time. I promise you. On my behalf and the behalf of Mark Waid. Everybody's have a great Sunday. Think well of you. Behave. Thanks, John.
Everybody, thank you, Howard.
Thank you, Jewish Dragon.
And more great panels today from Comics Art Live. I hope you'll stay tuned and watch them. But until
next time, Who's coming up?
Shit, I don't know. Kazra knows.
All those fucking people.
It was all about you for me today.
I'm the only one that counts. The hell with the rest of them. Later, man.